There are two ways a man finds out his wife is cheating. He catches her in the act, or he pieces it together one damn clue at a time. Me? I got both. My name is Joel Sanford. I'm 48 years old and I own Sanford's Auto, a small but busy shop just outside Houston. Used to be a different kind of man, though. Spent my younger years riding with the Devil's Sons MC, running with the wrong crowd, making all the wrong choices. Did a stretch in Huntsville for it, too? But I got out, cleaned up, and built something of my own. I don't regret my past, I just don't live there anymore. Thought Elaine didn't either. Turns out we were living in different realities. I wasn't suspicious at first. Hell, we'd been married 20 years. Things weren't perfect, but they never were. We had a rhythm. She worked long hours in some high-rise office downtown. I put in mine at the shop, and we met somewhere in the middle when we could. But something shifted. It was in the details. The way she kept her phone glued to her hand, angled away from me like it was a damn state secret. The way she started dressing sharper on days she had meetings, heels instead of flats, lipstick a shade darker than usual. And the business trips. First one in years, then another. The final crack came from Mrs. Abernathy, the nosy housekeeper who worked at the summer house we rarely used. She had this way of talking like she wasn't really talking, just throwing out bait to see what you'd bite on. "Mr. Sanford," she said one afternoon when I stopped by to check on some plumbing issues. "Your wife's been spending a lot of time here." Thought that was nice, getting away from the city, enjoying the quiet. I frowned. Elaine barely tolerated the place. "That's so?" She wiped her hands on her apron, eyes sharp behind her glasses. And I don't mean just her. A gentleman friend's been keeping her company." The words landed like a brick to the chest, but I didn't flinch. Just nodded, like she'd told me it might rain later. "That right?" She said again, giving me that long, knowing look. "He's younger. Tall, thin. Little messy looking. Artistic type, I'd say. You know how some women get when they hit a certain age. They like to feel appreciated." That last word carried weight. It was a knife turned slow. I didn't ask anymore. Didn't need to. Drove back to the shop, hands locked on the wheel, thoughts rolling slow and steady like a freight train. I could confront Elaine right then and there. Demand the truth, make a scene. But I didn't come this far in life by being reckless. No, if she was making a fool of me, I'd make sure she felt it twice over. The next day, I made a call to Troy Grady, an old friend from before things went south in my 20s. He used to wear a badge, now worked private security, which was just a fancy way of saying he knew how to find things out. "I need a favor," I told him. "Don't we all?" He laughed. "What's up?" "My wife's stepping out. Need proof." The line was silent for a beat. Then, "Shit, Joel?" "Yeah. You want me to handle this quiet?" "Quiet," I confirmed. "Just get me what I need." He didn't ask if I was sure. Grady knew me well enough to know that if I was calling, I was already past that point. The next few days, I went through the motions. Ran the shop, fixed up engines, joked with the guys like nothing was wrong. But something had shifted inside me. I'd spent years thinking I'd outrun the man I used to be, left him back in those jailhouse walls. Now he was pacing in my head, waiting. It took Grady less than a week to deliver. "She's seeing a guy named Leonard Barrett," he told me over coffee at a diner off the highway. "Local artist, does murals and paintings for rich folks downtown. Met your wife at a gallery a few months back. From what I gather, he's got a thing for older women. Calls 'em muses." He snorted. "Real poetic type?" I took the folder he slid across the table. Opened it. The pictures weren't grainy or distant. They were clear, sharp. Elaine and Barrett at a cafe, leaning in close. Elaine at the summer house, opening the door, smiling as he stepped inside. Another of them at a hotel, his hand on the small of her back. I shut the folder, exhaled slow. No more doubts. No more second-guessing. Just cold, solid truth? "You want me to keep an eye on M?" Grady asked. I shook my head. "No. I got what I need." "Joel," he said carefully. "I know you. Whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking it's time my wife learned actions have consequences." I left the coffee untouched. Walked out into the Texas sun, the heat pressing down like a weight, but I felt nothing at all. I went back to the shop, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work like nothing had changed. Pulled an old Chevy's transmission apart, grease up to my elbows, music blasting through the speakers. Business was good. I had 3 guys working under me, all solid hands, all kids who reminded me too much of myself when I was younger, too stubborn, too reckless, too damn close to throwing their lives away. I gave them work, something to focus on. A reason to keep showing up. But even as I tightened bolts and wiped my hands clean, my mind was somewhere else. The folder sat in my office, waiting. I didn't need to open it again. The images were burned into me. Elaine laughing, touching his arm, looking at him the way she used to look at me. Grady called that evening. You decide what you're gonna do? I'm not about to beg for an explanation if that's what you're asking. No, I figured not, he said. But I know you. You're not the type to just let something like this slide. He was right. I wasn't. That night, Elaine came home late again. She walked in like nothing was out of place, heels clicking on the hardwood, setting her bag down by the door. She smelled like expensive perfume and a hint of cigarette smoke he smoked. I remembered that from Grady's report. You eat? She asked, toeing off her shoes. I looked at her from my spot at the kitchen table. Yeah. She nodded, moving to pour herself a glass of wine, completely at ease, like she wasn't living a lie. I waited, watching her. Wondered how long she'd play this out before she worked up the nerve to tell me. If she ever planned to tell me at all. She caught me staring. What? I shook my head. Just thinking. About? I took a sip of my beer, let the silence stretch long enough to make her shift on her feet. How people get real comfortable lying to themselves. Her brow furrowed just for a second before she smoothed it out. You want to talk in riddles, or you want to say what's on your mind? I leaned back, studying her. You tell me, Elaine. You've been working late a lot. Lot of out-of-town meetings. You sure you got time for this conversation? Something flickered across her face. Barely there, but I caught it. A split-second calculation. How much do I know? How much can I get away with? I work a demanding job, she said finally, her voice even. I don't clock in and out like you do, Joel. There it was. That little Jap. I ran a business, my name was on the damn sign out front, but in her mind, she was the one doing important work. I didn't rise to it. Just nodded like that explained everything. Yeah. I bet it's real demanding. She hesitated, then walked past me toward the bedroom. I've got an early morning. Let's not do this tonight. And that was that. She had no idea she'd already lost. The next day, I started making my moves. Carefully, deliberately. You don't hit a problem like this head on, you take your time, set the board, make sure when you strike, it lands where it hurts the most. First stop was Elaine's best friend, Michelle. She and Elaine had been close since college, always covering for each other, always in each other's business. The kind of woman who took pride in knowing things before anyone else did. So I gave her a little push. Ran into her at the coffee shop near Elaine's office, acted like it was accidental. She smiled, all polite and friendly, but there was hesitation in her eyes. She knew something. Or maybe she just felt something shifting. You look tired, I said, stirring my coffee. Keeping Elaine's secrets must be exhausting. Her smile faltered. I don't know what you mean. Sure you do. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make her focus. I don't expect you to say anything. Just figured you should know the game's over. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Took a slow sip of her drink. I stood, dropped a few bills on the table. See you around, Michelle. I didn't need her to spill. Just needed to plant doubt, let the weight of it settle in. People like Michelle, they hate being on the losing side of things. Next was the firm Elaine worked at. I didn't go storming in there, didn't cause a scene. That wasn't my style. I just made a few calls, reached out to an old buddy who still did legal work. Turns out high-powered executives don't get to have affairs with subordinates and keep their jobs, not when the company's got a moral clause in their contracts. I let that ball start rolling too. Meanwhile, I kept things normal. Or close enough. Elaine still came home late, still acted like I was too stupid to notice the way she checked her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I let her play out her little fantasy, let her feel safe. Because when I made my move, I wanted it to hurt. A week passed and I let Elaine dig herself in deeper. She was careful, I give her that. Kept up the routine, kissed me on the cheek in the morning, sent the occasional text like nothing had changed. But I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. I wasn't her husband, I was the man watching her downfall in real time. One night, I got a text from Grady. Jim, 7 p.m. Got something you'll want to see. I knew exactly what that meant. I left work early, washed up, threw on a fresh shirt. Drove across town to a hole-in-the-wall boxing gym where I used to spar back in the day. Place smelled like sweat and old leather, the kind of place real fighters trained, not some air-conditioned boutique where rich kids took cardio classes. Grady was waiting by the front desk, arms crossed, nodding toward the back. He's here. Comes in twice a week. Does a lot of talking, not much punching. I followed his gaze. And there he was, a Leonard Barrett. The muse. He stood near the heavy bags, chatting with some guy who actually looked like he trained. Tall, wiry, with messy brown hair that probably took him 30 minutes to make look effortless. He had no business being in a place like this. A tourist. Playing tough for the aesthetic. I walked over slow, giving him time to notice. It took a second, but when his eyes landed on me, I saw it, the flicker of recognition. Then the realization. His face drained a little, but he tried to cover it up. "Can I help you?" he asked, casual. Too casual. Like a guy who suddenly realized he might have stepped into traffic. I stopped a few feet away, letting the silence stretch. Letting him feel it. "Yeah," I said. "You can start by shutting the hell up." The guy next to him shifted, sensing the shift in air. Leonard forced a laugh, nervous. I think you've got the wrong. You know exactly who I am." I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. "And you sure as hell know why I'm here." He took a step back, glancing toward the door, already calculating if he could make it out. But I wasn't blocking him. Just watching. "Listen, man," he started, hands up slightly. I didn't. Didn't what? I cut him off. Didn't think you'd get caught? Didn't think you'd ever have to face me? Or didn't think screwing another man's wife came with consequences? His mouth opened, then shut. He looked around, but nobody was stepping in. This was a gym, men handled their own business here. He swallowed. "It's not what you think." I took a step forward, close enough to watch him twitch. "Then what the hell is it?" He fumbled. It just happened, all right? It wasn't planned." I let that sit for a second. Then I laughed, shaking my head. "That's cute. Like you tripped and fell into my wife." His face burned red. He started to say something else, but I wasn't interested. "You look at me real close, Barrett," I said, voice low, steady. "Do I look like the kind of man that lets things slide?" He shook his head. "Barely. That's good. Means you're smarter than you look." I leaned in just a fraction. "So now you're gonna listen. Real careful." He nodded fast, swallowing hard. "You're done," I said. "You're gonna stop seeing her. You're gonna stop talking to her. And if I even hear your name near hers again, you're gonna wish I just came here to talk." He blinked fast, nodding again. His hands twitched at his sides. I could see it, every part of him wanted to run. I took a slow breath, straightened up. "Now, get the hell out of my sight." He didn't hesitate. Spun on his heel and beelined for the door. Damn near tripped on his way out. Grady stepped up beside me, arms crossed. "Well, that was a lot more polite than I expected." I exhaled, rolling my shoulders. "Man like that? You don't even need to touch him. Fear does the work for you." Grady chuckled. "True enough." He clapped my shoulder. "Now, what about Elaine?" I didn't answer right away. Watching Barrett scurry out the door was satisfying, sure. But it wasn't over. Not yet. I ran my tongue over my teeth, already knowing what came next. She's about to learn what it feels like to lose. I let a couple of days pass. Let Elaine think everything was normal. She still came home late, still checked her phone like a teenager sneaking texts under the dinner table. If she noticed anything different about me, she didn't let on. Maybe she thought she had me figured out. Maybe she thought she was smarter. One night, she came home a little earlier than usual. I was in the garage, working on an old Harley that had been sitting too long. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. "You're quiet tonight," she said. I wiped my hands on a rag. "Am I?" "Yeah. Feels like you're—" "I don't know. Holding something back." I looked at her then, really looked. The sharp suit, the perfect hair, the way she held herself like she was always preparing for a board meeting. I used to think that confidence was what I loved about her. Now it just looked like armor. "Long day at work," I said finally. She nodded, studying me. "You sure that's all?" I didn't answer. Just let the silence stretch. She hated silence. She sighed, walking in further. "I don't know what's going on with you lately, Joel, but if you've got something to say, just say it." I tossed the rag onto the workbench. "All right." I turned to face her fully. "Where were you last Tuesday?" She blinked, thrown off. "What?" "You heard me." She faltered just for a second, then recovered. "I had a late meeting." I nodded slowly, like I was considering it. "And after?" She hesitated again, adjusting the strap of her purse. "Drinks. With colleagues." I tilted my head. "At the summer house?" The color drained from her face, just a fraction. Not enough for a normal person to catch. But I saw it. I saw the gears turning, the calculation. "That's what this is about," she said, shaking her head, laughing like I was the ridiculous one. "You think I'm Joel? Come on." I didn't move. Didn't blink. She licked her lips. "You're being paranoid." I reached over to the workbench, picked up the folder Grady had given me. I'd left it sitting there, waiting for the right moment. Held it up and flipped it open, just enough for her to see the pictures. She stopped breathing for a second. I saw it happen. Her eyes darted over the images, her, Leonard, the hotel, the summer house. Her hand twitched like she wanted to grab it and tear it apart. I let the silence settle again, thick and heavy. Then finally I spoke. "How long?" She swallowed hard. "Joel? How long?" She squared her shoulders like she was preparing for a negotiation. She exhaled, pressing her lips together. A few months. I nodded like that was useful information. Why? Her jaw tightened. Does it matter? Yeah, I said, my voice steady. It does. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Jesus, Joel? What do you want me to say? That I felt neglected? That you spend more time with that damn garage than you do with me? That I got tired of being the only one putting effort into this? I just watched her. She scoffed, shaking her head. You know, I'm not the only one to blame here. I exhaled slowly, setting the folder down. That right? Yes. She crossed her arms. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked about my day? When was the last time you? I held up a hand. Save it. Joel? I don't need your excuses, Elaine. She stared at me, breathing hard, frustration bleeding into something else. Maybe fear. Maybe realization. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You want to play the victim here? Fine. But don't stand there and act like you tripped and fell into bed with him. You made a choice. A deliberate, selfish choice. And now you get to live with it. Her mouth pressed into a thin line. And what about you? What are you gonna do? I smiled, slow and humorless. Oh, you'll find out. She didn't like that. Not one bit. I walked past her, out of the garage, leaving her standing there in the smell of motor oil and betrayal. I let her sit with it. Let her feel the weight of knowing she'd been caught, knowing she had no control over what came next. That's the thing about people like Elaine, they always think they're the smartest person in the room until the floor gets ripped out from under them. She tried to act normal after that night, but I could see the cracks. The way she hesitated before walking into a room, like she was bracing for impact. The way she looked at me out of the corner of her eye, searching for something, maybe a clue, maybe a sign of how bad this was about to get. I didn't give her one. Let her stew in it. Let her feel the creeping sense of helplessness. The first real hit came at work. I had a buddy, Tom Hagen, who worked in corporate law, handled contracts and compliance for some big firms downtown. He owed me a favor from way back. Didn't take much to get him to make a few calls. I got the update 2 days later, sitting at the shop between jobs, drinking coffee out of a chipped mug. She's in deep, Tom told me over the phone. The firm got wind of her little side project. And guess what? Turns out screwing a subordinate doesn't look good on an executive's resume. I smirked, taking a slow sip of coffee. That right? They're having a meeting tomorrow. Officially, they'll give her a chance to step down quietly. Unofficially? They're done with her. I nodded even though he couldn't see it. Good. That evening, Elaine came home looking rattled. She tried to cover it up, but I caught the way she slammed the car door harder than usual, the way she tossed her purse onto the kitchen counter like it had personally offended her. I sat at the table, arms crossed, waiting. She exhaled sharply. You did something. I raised an eyebrow. You sound paranoid. Don't play dumb, Joel. She pressed her hands against the counter, gripping it like she was trying to steady herself. They called me into a meeting today. Told me there were concerns about my conduct. That some information had come to light. I just watched her. Her nostrils flared. You don't get to do this to me. I set my coffee down. I didn't do a damn thing, Elaine. You did this to yourself. She stared at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Not confidence. Not control. Just the realization that she was losing. She swallowed, trying to gather herself. Is this what you wanted? To ruin me? I stood up, slow, deliberate. Walked over until I was close enough for her to see just how serious I was. No, Elaine, I said, my voice steady. What I wanted was a wife who didn't lie to my face every damn day. But since I didn't get that, I'll settle for watching you finally pay the price for it. Her lip trembled, but she bit it back. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of me. I stepped back. Oh, and one more thing. She braced herself. You might want to talk to Lorraine before she hears about all this from someone else. She stiffened, eyes wide. What did you do? I gave her a cold smile. Nothing. Yet. I let her sit with that. Let her stew in it. Then I walked out, leaving her standing there, gripping the counter like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Elaine barely slept that night. I heard her moving around, pacing in the bedroom, opening drawers, closing them too hard. Maybe she thought about running, getting ahead of it. But where would she go? The life she'd built was crumbling, and she knew it. The next morning, she was already dressed when I walked into the kitchen. Suit perfect, hair immaculate, but she looked like hell, eyes tired, face drawn. She was holding her coffee like it might steady her hands. I grabbed my own mug, took a slow sip. You talked to Lorraine yet? Her jaw clenched. You don't have to drag her into this. She's already in it, I said, setting the mug down. She deserves the truth before she hears it from someone else. Elaine exhaled sharply, pressing her fingers to her temples. She won't understand. I let out a dry laugh. Yeah, because you sure as hell don't. She glared at me. Do you think this is easy for me? You think I don't? She stopped herself, inhaling through her nose, forcing herself calm. I made a mistake, Joel. I know that. But you're trying to destroy me. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. You did that all by yourself, Elaine. Her hands curled into fists. I built my career from nothing. You think they're just going to throw me out over this? They don't have to, I said, tilting my head. Because by the time this is done, you won't have anything left worth holding on to. Something in her cracked then. She set the coffee down too fast, sloshing it over the rim, and ran a hand through her hair, a wild, frustrated gesture. Jesus, Joel? What do you want from me? I want you to face what you did, I said, voice flat. I want you to feel what it's like to have everything ripped away from you while you stand there helpless. I want you to see what it means to lose. She swallowed hard, blinking fast. I pushed off the counter. You should go. You've got a long day ahead. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, plead, maybe bargain, but she didn't. She grabbed her purse, walked out the door, and left without another word. Later that afternoon, I met Lorraine at the diner near the shop. She was already waiting in a booth, her fingers tapping against her coffee cup. My daughter was tough, sharp, had more of me in her than she liked to admit. When I slid into the seat across from her, she looked up, reading my face before I even spoke. It's true, isn't it? I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my jaw. Yeah, kid. It's true. She nodded slowly, pressing her lips together. She didn't cry. Didn't ask me why. She already knew. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Listen to me. You don't owe her anything. Whatever you decide, however you want to handle this, I'll back you. She met my eyes, her own cold and steady. I don't want to see her. I nodded. Then you don't have to. She exhaled, looking out the window. God. She really threw it all away, didn't she? She did. Lorraine shook her head, laughing bitterly. She spent my whole life telling me to be strong, to make smart choices, and then this? I didn't have an answer for that. She straightened up, setting her shoulders. All right. Then I'm done with her. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand once. No words needed. When I got home that night, Elaine was already there, sitting on the couch, staring at the wall like it might tell her what the hell had gone wrong. When she heard the door, she turned, eyes red-rimmed, face pale. I talked to Lorraine, she said, voice hoarse. I set my keys down, waiting. She won't answer my calls. I didn't say anything. Her breath hitched, just barely. She said she doesn't want to see me. I nodded once. That's her choice. She blinked fast, like she was trying to hold something back. Joel? I tilted my head. Yeah? Her voice cracked. Is this it? I let out a slow breath. It was over the second you walked into that hotel room, Elaine. You just didn't know it yet. She swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. After a long moment, she stood, shoulders shaking. She grabbed her purse, walked toward the door. Stopped. I loved you, she whispered. I didn't flinch. Yeah. And you threw it away. She didn't turn back. Just walked out. I waited until I heard her car start, the tires rolling out of the driveway. Then I sat down, exhaled, and let the weight lift off my chest. She was gone. And I was free. A month passed. Then, too. Life moved forward the way it always does, steady, uncaring, like a river washing over whatever wreckage got left behind. The shop stayed busy. Hired another guy, a young kid named Tony who was rough around the edges but willing to learn. Lorraine kept her distance from Elaine. I did too. I didn't have to cut her off, she did that herself when she walked out that door. One afternoon I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I didn't need one. I recognized the neat, careful handwriting immediately. I almost threw it in the trash without opening it. Almost. Instead, I took it inside, poured myself a drink, and sat down at the kitchen table. Joel? I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe I just need to say it even if you never read it. I lost my job. No surprise there. They gave me a severance package, but it won't last forever. I'm looking for something new, but my name doesn't carry the weight it used to. People talk. Word spreads. Lorraine won't return my calls. That hurts more than anything. I don't blame her. I just miss her. I know I did this to myself. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But for whatever it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it. Take care of yourself. Elaine. I read it twice, then set it down. I didn't feel much. No anger. No satisfaction. No need to respond. That part of my life was over. A knock sounded at the door. I tossed the letter aside and got up. Opened it to find Lorraine standing there, hands stuffed in the pockets of her hoodie, looking like she was still debating whether knocking had been a good idea. Hey, kid, I said, stepping back. Come on in. She walked past me, glanced at the kitchen table. What's that? Nothing. I picked up the letter and tossed it into the trash. She didn't ask. Just sat down, tapping her fingers against her knee. I saw Mom today. I grabbed a couple of beers from the fridge, handed her one without comment. She was old enough. She cracked it open, took a sip, winced a little, still getting used to the taste. How'd that go? I asked, leaning against the counter. She shrugged. She looked bad. Like really bad. I took a drink, waited. She asked me to meet her for coffee. Said she wanted to talk. I almost didn't go. Lorraine ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. I thought maybe she'd try to fix things, I don't know. But it was just more of the same. She kept trying to explain, like if I just heard her out I'd suddenly understand why she blew up her whole damn family. I nodded. That's what people like her do. They rewrite the past until they're the victim. Lorraine exhaled, rubbing her temple. I told her I wasn't interested in hearing excuses. She started crying. She looked up at me, frowning. That's new. She's not crying for you, kid, I said. She's crying for herself. Lorraine was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded, slow and final. I told her I'm done. Good, I said. She took another sip of beer, then set the can down. So, what now? I thought about that. About the shop, the guys I worked with, the road still ahead of me. About the weight that wasn't on my chest anymore, the anger that had finally burned out. Now? I said, a slow smirk tugging at the corner of my mouth. Now we move on. Lorraine smiled back, lifting her beer in a silent toast. And just like that it was done.